There are many questions which surround the search for Sasquatch. For example, why science doesn't recognize it when so many witnesses swear to have seen it. Why concrete proof of its existence has yet to manifest to a satisfactory degree. How the creature remains undetected when by all rights it shouldn't be able to, at least not with such an apparent level of proficiency. Another question which haunts many in the Bigfoot world is one of a somewhat different nature. It is less a question about the creature itself and more about the hypothetical, unseen mechanisms that may or may not dictate the structure of the world around us. That question is simple. What does the government know? It has become more common recently to wonder what those in power know when giving thought to the idea of a yet undiscovered species. It seems almost certain that if large, unknown creatures are lurking in yet untold numbers in the wild places of North America, that some sort of governmental agency would, at least by now, be aware of it. Some intelligence branch, wildlife service, law enforcement department must know something. And since they aren't talking about it, the assumption many make is one of conspiracy.
I'm often asked if I have ever come across any information that might indicate that there could be information being withheld about Sasquatch. And one of the reasons I'm asked that question is because I've spent a lot of time filing Freedom of Information Act requests and also speaking with federal government and also state government employees about their experiences with the Sasquatch or the relict hominoid enigma. And although I can say that I haven't really come across a lot of information that strongly suggests something like a cover-up, I know a lot of people tend to like to gravitate toward those conspiracies, what I have found is that in the few instances where official documents do exist, often the subject is downplayed. More often, when federal employees have had experiences, if they've seen something themselves in one of the national parks like Yellowstone, if they talk about it, it's downplayed officially. Those who actually do talk about it often don't want their names associated with the circumstances. And so for me, it's been very unique digging both into the history, but also the government side of this, because while I think it leads to the perception of a sort of official secrecy or a effort to try and conceal what many believe is the reality of relict hominoids or Sasquatch, what I find is that really most people's attitudes toward this subject cause that perception due to their lack of wanting to be associated with it. The national parks, frankly, based on numerous inquiries I've made with various parks, with the Department of the Interior and other federal agencies, they really would rather not to have to say, look, you know, there could be an unidentified animal in our parks and something that is human-like, something even that is potentially dangerous. Again, with all those unknown quantities, it's easy to see why they would downplay that, but frankly, a lot of them seem to indicate they just don't believe that there is such a thing as Sasquatch. Interestingly, based on some of the eyewitness testimony provided to me and a few of the documents I've obtained, it does seem to suggest there is more there than others would have us believe.
The idea is not one entirely without precedent. Those within the UFO community have assumed for decades that a wealth of undisclosed information must be hiding behind the walls of the intelligence framework of the US government. And it turns out they were right. If recent whistleblower testimonies and congressional hearings have any truth to them, there is indeed a dearth of startling and groundbreaking information on record which has been kept out of the public eye for decades. For many, this is confirmation of a long-running and ongoing conspiracy. Proof that the public has not been given the whole truth, and speculation simmers over other buried secrets.
Well, I think there is at least a hint of governmental knowledge about these creatures. There was that one very uncanny document that came out several years ago purporting to be an Army manual for training in California, that one of the fauna that you might encounter out there would be a Sasquatch. Now, I've never seen anybody, I've seen a lot of people refute it, but I've never seen anybody convincingly say that it was a complete hoax. So I'm kind of on the border straddling that line between that it was being a fake and also being very sincere as well too. I think that's something that the government would put out even if there was a possibility of something being there. But also, the whole oxymoron of military intelligence also would lead me to believe that if they put something out there because they definitively knew that something was out there, and I think that you don't have to be much of a conspiracy theorist to at least contend with the idea that our government knows that something like a Bigfoot exists.
I think it kind of, I mean, if we're to believe everything that's coming out it's a truthful assessment of what the government knows and has, and we're going to believe that, especially after 70 years of them telling everybody they were crazy, and that there's no such thing as little green men and flying saucers. It goes hand in hand with anything that is mysterious or cryptid of nature, that people over the years were told they were crazy, or we're not gonna take that serious. We're not gonna take that report serious. We're not gonna investigate that. It's crazy. I mean, if they're going to come and tell us that there's spaceships that we have that are not of this planet, okay, well, where did they come from? Did they come from another dimension, which has been scientifically proven that there's other dimensions? What else is there out there? And I think the really crazy thing would be to think that there isn't something else out there.
I've often wondered why some people do seem to kind of gravitate toward the idea that there's some official secrecy or some sort of an effort to conceal information about subjects, not only like Sasquatch, but we see this often with topics like UAP and the government's information that it possesses about that topic. And in truth, although there are some reasons for official secrecy, and especially when it comes to things like national security, when it comes to the subject of Sasquatch, again, I haven't found very much evidence that there is an effort to outright conceal information, but people do tend to think that way. And in fairness, I think that's a very natural human response. You got to think that people tend to try, and when we have bits and pieces of information, we try to kind of assemble a bigger, broader picture from the small pieces we are shown. We connect the dots, as the saying goes. And again, it's a natural human tendency. Psychological studies have shown that people will tend to try and draw conclusions based on what information we have. And although that is what sort of gives rise to conspiracy theories, I think that really, as a researcher over the years, what one will have to learn how to do over time is to look at data and not necessarily infer things about that data that is unknown or that cannot be concluded when you don't have the complete data set. So when it comes to a subject like Sasquatch and what the government might know, yes, the government occasionally will receive reports, and yes, some people have filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and they'll get documents that describe Sasquatch sightings. But really, in sum total, when you look at the way the government deals with that topic, again, it's like National Park Service employees I've spoken with and others. There are a few who have maybe had some experiences themselves or have heard stories. The majority will say, look, we don't look into that. We don't even believe the creature's out there. And that, again, in itself sort of contributes to this idea that, well, because they don't want to talk about it, because they dismiss it, that means there must be something being covered up. After all, how else can we reconcile that opinion with the claims of those who say, we've had experiences firsthand? And so I think that it's a natural tendency, but we also have to just understand that it's really not probably the most likely explanation in terms of what's happening. Again, I think that there's some data. Some of it supports the existence of Sasquatch. Very little supports the idea of a cover-up.
There are several high-profile conspiracy theories, many of which have been conclusively debunked, which continue to incite debate and examination. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which rocked the United States of America in the 60s, is among the most high-profile. The supposition that the Earth is flat and not an observable globe is another. Ideas surrounding groups such as the supposed New World Order and the Illuminati speak to mankind's fear about vast, ongoing plots which work in the background and dictate the course of dramatic world events. Sometimes these ideas are laughable, and sometimes they are very dangerous, They are all thematically linked. That John Q. Public is kept blissfully and very intentionally unaware by the so-called powers that be. This assumption that said powers are aware of much more than they're letting on extends beyond the UFO community and crops up in most areas wherein people speculate over unsolved mysteries. It pervades the world of paranormal intrigue and is a recurring topic of discussion surrounding not just potential extraterrestrial visitors, but other strange phenomena as well. This is true also in the realm of cryptozoology, and most noticeably, including the regular and consistent reports of yet unidentified, upright, ape-like creatures.
Over the years, I've heard from a lot of people who have had stories where, they either hit a Bigfoot on the road, somebody shows up, takes the body, and it's gone. I've heard stories about, and I think a lot of us in this arena have heard the stories about when Mount St. Helens erupted, and how the National Guard or the Army went around and tried to get, check in the caves to see if there were Bigfoot in there, and actually rescued some Bigfoot that were burnt. And that was actually a story that I had, probably one of my favorite episodes, where I had a guy who was really high up in the military, but he himself told me that what the military and the government do is if there is a cover-up, it's being covered up by ignorance, so that not everybody doesn't know everything. There's one person that knows everything, and there might be 3 or 4 different factions involved, but they all don't know everything. And because he himself had heard the stories in the military circles about the Mount St. Helens stuff, where they went and got rescued Bigfoot, found some Bigfoot that were mortally wounded.
Can you talk about the bodies, the supposed bodies?
The bodies at Mount St. Helens. So being in this field, dealing with Mount St. Helens history as well as Bigfoot, we get all different walks of life, right? And so that story comes up pretty often. Talked to numerous people that claim to have been involved with that. Older gentlemen that had come in here and said that they were part of the National Guard, reclamation logging team, search and rescue people that were up there. Let's look at the facts of what we know, right? So in 1980, 230 square miles flattened. The estimation from the biologists that were up there, 175,000 animals killed. That's everything. Bear, deer, elk, birds, chipmunks, whatever, right? A lot of animals killed. Now, as teams are in there and they're looking for victims and they're doing reclamation logging and so forth, these bodies strewn around the blast zone pose a biologic hazard. So the decision was made to remove the bodies, burn them, and dispose of them so that people are protected. Field biologists get involved and they say, well, there's a lot of data here. We can look at populations and so forth. They start categorizing these bodies. You got this pile of deer, elk, bear, etc. going down the line. Numerous people claim that there was a pile of bodies that looked like burned human bodies, and they were kept underneath a cover, like a big tarp. There were National Guard personnel that were kind of watching over this to keep people away from them. And then at some point in the evening, a lot of people claim that these bodies were kind of netted up and flown out under cover of darkness to who knows where. Now, the story goes a little bit further, too, in that some people claim that an individual was recovered, was still alive, a Sasquatch, and that was given medical attention and put in a Jeep, driven through the blast zone, looking for its friends, family, or whatever, making calls into caves. That part I'm skeptical with, right? Because we're looking at a blast zone where the entire forest is on its side. Where are you driving a Jeep? Well, we can look at facts. Michael Lemieux is a cinematographer, very talented, was in the blast zone around May 25th with that eruption. Takes him 8 hours to walk a half a mile, and yet supposedly they're driving a Jeep. So that part I'm not really comfortable with, but the part with the bodies that were recovered, after talking to numerous people, they give details of where individuals were stationed around this pile. It's a consistency of 6 to 8 bodies that were under there. I haven't met anybody yet that says, I know exactly how many, but it was kind of an estimation. They describe hands, feet, that burned hair, blackened bodies that they had been killed by the heat blast from the eruption. And they all talk about what type of aircraft took them out, and the details fit up, and these people fit together, and these people don't know each other. I wasn't there. I don't know if I'll ever know the answer unless we get some kind of declassified documents. But I can say that knowing that Sasquatch exists, it would be foolish to surmise that none were killed in this gigantic eruption. So it's absolutely possible. And I think they would have, if they find the bodies of deer and elk, well, we would find bodies of Sasquatch.
The next question on a long-running list becomes thus: does the government know more about Sasquatch than they admit? For that matter, do they know anything about Bigfoot? And what governmental bodies or even military or intelligence agencies might be involved in the collection of suppression of this information? Is the official answer to the question that Bigfoot is a hoax, fabrication, or delusion a convenient way to cover up an inconvenient truth? That truth being that there is a species which exists in North America which science does not yet recognize, and which the official government record states does not exist. According to many, the answer is yes, or at least this is the assumption that is often made. Various points of conjecture, rumor, and even in-person sightings perpetuate the idea. Dissecting this mystery and glimpsing the truth behind it, however, is something easier said than done. It presents a wealth of additional questions which must be answered, and those answers have, thus far, proven as elusive as the Sasquatch itself. One actual fact in favor of this assumption is a fairly easy one to note, and it can be examined simply by looking at a map. Sightings of ape-like beings often take place on government-owned land. State and national parks, national forests, and even areas near large cave systems all play host to annual sightings with great frequency and regularity. Given this, and when considering the hundreds of independent eyewitness reports on record, surely those who spend the most time in these places, such as park rangers, game wardens, maintenance workers, and volunteers, must be aware of the creature's existence. Not only from being in such close proximity to so many eyewitness encounters, but through sheer inevitability, they must also be witnesses to these strange encounters. After all, how could they not? As there has not been a mass coming forward by those employed to oversee these areas, the conclusion drawn by some is that they have been forbidden from doing so. It is a conclusion often drawn in comment threads and online discussion forums, speculated over in countless forms of media, with theories about government-engineered super soldiers and secretive zoological study groups running rampant. It prompts many to venture down avenues of speculation so bizarre and outlandish that they may stand to threaten the hard-won and oft-contested credibility of the legion of field researchers who study the American wood ape. And yet, the speculation endures, with no clear signs of ceasing.
No, I think that's a great question. I think people, whenever it comes to the government, automatically think of conspiracy because they think our government, this kind of shadowy organization, even though we live in a Republican democracy, it still has to be hiding something from its people. And UFOs, of course, is kind of what really kind of sparked this on because, you know, anybody that's done any kind of research on UAPs know that there's something going on out there. And there's so much military involvement as well, too, that we just assume that there is military cover-up going on. So whenever it comes to Bigfoot, it's not so out of the realm of possibility that this kind of lends into that conspiracy thought as well. And I just think that people that tend to believe in something that is not universally accepted are seen as part of a group, and this group has it's sometimes mocked, it's sometimes belittled, but they're part of a group and there's solidarity within that group, and that group can only take itself seriously and give itself any kind of legitimacy by sticking together. And if it's looking forward on the outside world, it's not going to get any kind of universal acceptance because what they are purporting to believe in has not been proven by mainstream science.
There are, however, some examples of former and current officials coming forward to disclose a Bigfoot sighting. Many modern Sasquatch researchers boast backgrounds in law enforcement and military service, but to date, no verified government employees have produced proof of a mass cover-up. On the other side of the coin, however, there are testimonies from named witnesses which discuss unspoken vows of silence regarding strange activities, and quiet, undocumented agreements not necessarily to cover up a potential sighting, but to keep it close to the chest whenever possible. This would seem reasonable, and somewhat less conspiratorial than the idea of an overarching plot. There are many reasons why a given police department or wildlife service might wish to avoid Sasquatch hunters descending on their hometowns en masse, and this alone may be sufficient motivation for what the outside observer may view as a conspiracy. To meet that definition, however, it requires multiple parties to be involved in intentional and organized attempts to suppress or conceal the truth. A simple hesitancy or informal agreement to not widely discuss certain events for the sake of the benefit of those involved does not mean the true definition of a conspiracy or cover-up. In some cases, there may even be a lack of interest on the part of those in the know. Already short-staffed, overtaxed government offices, scattered across various parts of the United States, are likely concerned with more pressing, immediate matters than joining the search for Bigfoot. Rumors have abounded for many years of unmarked vehicles and troops in military attire arriving in the wake of Sasquatch encounters. They have become all the more popular in the internet age, with dozens of purported witnesses claiming to have seen or even been contacted by them. They are sometimes accompanied by black or unmarked helicopters, appearing from places unknown following a sighting or report. In some cases, they have been said to remove the bodies of fallen Sasquatch, whisking them off to secret locations, though these are stories difficult to substantiate and often come in the form of online chatter. This is another contrast to that of the UFO discussion. Rumors of men in black are nearly synonymous with flying saucers themselves, dating back to the dawn of the quote, extraterrestrial craze in the United States. As far back as 1947, in the wake of the Roswell crash incident, and even before, the idea of a covert, possibly governmental body contacting and intimidating UFO witnesses has been present and often assumed to be a reality. Recent whistleblower testimony, resulting in global headlines and a fevered ongoing discussion, also seem to confirm this, at least to many who have long suspected that there is more to the so-called men in black than fictitious interpretations. While stories in the Sasquatch category of men in black and military-fatigued operatives intimidating witnesses are not as common, it might be a stretch to call them rare or unprecedented. There are enough of them to give any serious researcher pause, and beg the question of what might be going on behind the scenes.
The only thing that I've heard about happened a number of years back. There was a couple of researchers that were out in the ridge, and just by chance they happened across, from what they said, were a group of military people in uniform marching through the woods. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they were armed. So what they were doing, nobody knows. That's really the only thing that
In 2015, I was told by these 3 other researchers who I'm friends with, they had come up to the Quebec Run Wilds in Forbes State Forest. It wasn't a proper day for anyone to be out in the woods for, and as they first exited the blacktop paved road onto the dirt road, they discovered there was this cargo pickup truck with a personnel carrier on the back, and guys were at the back of the truck taking out backpacks, large backpacks, and they were in military camo fatigue jumpsuits, but they weren't standard issue. These were like the blue, and they were blue and other colors. They looked very military. And as these friends of mine were driving by slowly, they just looked, nobody was observing my friends. They ignored them as they drove by. So they went another 100 yards, and there was another truck equal exactly. I mean, these were very swanky looking pickup trucks. I don't remember if they were Dodge or what they were, it doesn't matter, but they were top tier pickup trucks with this nice personnel cargo carrier on the back of the bed, extended bed. Same sort of thing was happening at the second one. Guys out back of it, getting their material, their equipment onto their back, looked exactly the same dress as the first group, and they just kind of threw their hand up and drove by this. Well, they continued on down. They were going to a location. They had a destination, a trailhead, that they wanted to go back and examine another incident where Bigfoot allegedly had been surrounding two guys at a campsite within a week of the time they arrived. And that was their whole mission, to be up on this location. So they continued a little further, and they saw a third truck. Same activity, same looking type of camo fatigues that they were wearing, and putting on these extremely large backpacks. And they went on down. Now they're talking, what's going on? Why is these military looking guys? They were thinking it was something to do with the Game Commission, because this is a state park, and they figured it was either state game land or state rangers or something. They didn't know it was military. There was no insignias on the truck. There was no indication of what these people, who they were. When they got to the parking lot where their destination was, there was another truck sitting there, and the same 2 or 3 guys getting on their backpacks. That's when they realized the driver was a civilian. And so they pulled up kind of close to the truck, and one of the guys, he's a guy that will approach anyone. He said, I'm going to go find out what's going on. So he gets out, and the other 2 sat there and watched. He goes over to the driver and he says, hey, what's going on? Why are you guys here? Well, the guy, he said, this is they were from, goodness, I wouldn't expect to talk about this. The camp, the Army base in North Carolina, Fort Bragg. And he said they've been down in West Virginia doing training exercises, and they're going to do map navigation in Quebec Run. And when I was told this, I said, why? This is an old area. It's got plenty of maps existing. Everyone knows the trails are very visible, very well marked. And why is the military from North Carolina sending troop personnel up here to Pennsylvania? Well, we didn't know what. They didn't explain any of that to us. So as these guys are getting their backpacks on, these 3 people I knew were watching them. Well, there was 2 marked trails right by where their truck is. Instead of going either one of those marked trails, they just went into off trail. They just went up into the woods and disappeared, which was another strange incident. So my friend said they went on down the trail, went to the location, did their research and analysis of the area, didn't find any information, came back, and there was no military trucks anywhere 45 minutes later. So they didn't know what to think of it. They told us this later. Well, one of the 3 passengers, my friends, was a female, lives down in Uniontown area. She came by coincidence up to what they call Jamonville Glen about 4 or 5 days later. And she had a habit, I guess, of doing this. She came up to this area. While they were gone, when they came back to the car and they were leaving the area, she had a new notebook or a tablet, I don't remember, but it was brand new. And when she went to check, because she has a business that she owns down in Connellsville, when she went to check to see if there was any messages from her employees, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't come on. She couldn't get it to start up. And so she thought, maybe I'm not getting a signal. So when they exited the woods, she tried again. It was dead. When she took it to, I don't know who she had her service with, Verizon or whoever, they checked it. Technicians come back and they said, where did you have this at? It's completely fried. It's destroyed. Whatever you had it around, it was destroyed. And there's nothing out in those woods where they were that should have emitted a signal into that device and killed it like that. So this same lady got another device, and she came back up 4 or 5 days later to Jamonville, which is, as the crow flies, maybe 5 miles from the incident area with the military-looking guys. As she's sitting there and she's doing her tablet or whatever she had, this car, it's an isolated area, even though there's people that live around there and there's businesses, a very slim amount of businesses, but there's people that travel these roads. she noticed this white four-door sedan, just average car, go by, and it slowly went by, and she looked and didn't pay any attention. A couple minutes, the same car came back the opposite direction, and it's the same, and she noticed then it was a single guy in the car by himself, and he's slowly looking at her, and he goes on by. Well, now she's getting concerned. Who is this guy? Why? I don't have anybody here. She didn't have any weapons, and she's thinking, should I leave? Well, she didn't. And in a few minutes, this guy came back for the third time. He drove into the parking lot, and she said he come by her where she was sitting on a wooden bench and didn't even look in her direction, went to the extreme end of the parking lot, pulled in and parked. He gets out. This is where it got bizarre. He's wearing the same camo outfit, looks exactly like these guys she and the other two guys saw less than a week earlier. He gets out, never looks over in her direction, goes to the trunk of the car, opens it up. He puts this same looking massive sized backpack on, except he grabs a weapon and he puts a rifle, a military style rifle, on his shoulder, never looks at this lady, turns and walks into the woods. Again, there's marked trails there. He didn't go in the marked trails. Now she's texting and sending messages to her employees because she's concerned. Who is this guy? He's got a weapon. Why is he taking a weapon into a historical battleground that's off limits to weapons? You're not supposed to have weapons on this property. 45 minutes or roughly thereabout, he comes back out, no backpack, no rifle, gets into the car, and he drives away as if he'd done nothing unusual.
A Sasquatch conspiracy could be in effect anywhere in the world, but there are some places where the discussion arises more often. One is the Chestnut Ridge, an area of recurring and diverse high strangeness, located in Pennsylvania and a frequent reference point for both the Sasquatch and UFO communities. The Chestnut Ridge has drawn the eye of paranormal researchers, from Bigfoot hunters to UFO enthusiasts and beyond, for decades. It is easily a place where one might speculate that a cover-up could be going on, and some rumors might serve as tacit confirmation, though specific details, documents, and confirmation, of course, remain elusive, as is the case with any good conspiracy theory.
There have been some cases over the years where I guess you'd call mystery men, speculating may have been government, were interested in some cases I worked on. But the two cases that really come to mind would have been from 1973, during that big wave. Down in Derry Township, this would have been, I believe it was in August of 73. There was a large mobile home community down there at the time. And for weeks and weeks, different residents of that mobile home community were reporting not only UFO sightings, but Bigfoot sightings as well. On this particular day, I was down with my team that evening at Harmony, PA, which was not near the ridge. There had been a Bigfoot sighting down there. My team was down there. There was a man had just cut his grass, and there were some big impressions in the fresh grass. And we were down there interviewing him and looking for evidence. And while we're there, I get a call from the 911 center over the radio system, and I heard it on the monitor in my car. They were requesting me to send a team up to Derry Township. The police up there were calling me to send up my team. They just had an incident in this large mobile home community, and the police were on the way there. Well, we left there. It took us a while to get there. We arrived on the scene. When we got there, the police officer had already been there. He found some possible tracks. He preserved the tracks for us. When we got there, we found out there's these families in their mobile home. They hear like this baby crying sound from outside the back of their trailer. Something was scratching on the back door of the trailer, on the back side of the trailer. They had a dog outside, but the dog wouldn't bark. It was like whining very low, like it was very, very scared. And they opened up the back door, and here's this very tall, dark, broad-shouldered creature that runs between a few of the trailers, and other people see it. I believe it made a scream, and I think the person screamed back at the same time.
The incident in the trailer court happened on a Friday night. We come home from Westmoreland County Fair, and the whole neighborhood was abuzz, and people everywhere just I was trying to figure out what was going on. They said the woman lived across from me, heard a noise at the back of her trailer, and she opened the door and Bigfoot was standing there. That's the story I got, and I kind of blew it off. And they were all, the whole neighborhood shook up. So, being what I am in them days, I went to the back of the trailer, into the woods looking around, and made it sound like I thought Bigfoot would do, like I seen on TV. And everybody scattered, and people were tripping and falling over each other. And the woman, 2 kids tried to get through the doorway, and all 3 of them, like 3 stooges, they couldn't get through the door fast enough. And then what I call Bigfoot Patrol pulled in with their CBs to blare, and then you could hear reports, newcomers, which is a factory, Bagley Ridge, Chestnut Ridge, just reports all over that night.
Okay, when you say Bigfoot Patrol, what do you mean?
It was about 5 or 6 Jeeps. They just, I assumed they were like investigating, not sanctioned, you know, just on their own. I don't know. They were the whole 4, 5, 6 Jeeps with CBs, and they were chasing down Bigfoot.
During the time it was going on, their power was going on and off in their trailer. My team gets there, we're interviewing the people. We found that the main power supply box had been ripped open, as I remember, and the main electrical power line that went under the ground to the trailer had been ripped up out of the ground. So that's an interesting energy connection right there. So here's the rest of the story. There were some footprints up there. It was a really interesting case. I believe it was 4 days later, as I recall, I get an emergency call from an operator. Well, back in those days, we actually had telephone operators. And the person who was involved in that incident was trying to reach me. I was on the line, was very busy with calls coming in. The operator broke in and said, I have an emergency call for you from this person, needs to talk to you. I took the call, and she said, I was trying to reach you, but I think I may have done something wrong. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I've been trying to call you. I found some possible hair samples out where the thing was standing. I wanted to give them to you. And she said, this man showed up with an Ohio license plate, kind of heavy set. I think it was kind of in a gray over, like a work clothing type thing. I remember odd belt, had some kind of an ID badge around him, something about UFO. And he wanted to interview her about her Bigfoot sighting. And she told him, she said, I've been trying to get hold of Stan Gordon. I have these hair samples. And he said, oh, I know Stan. Give them to me and I'll make sure he gets them, which he did. Well, whoever that guy was, we never found out, and I never saw the hair samples. But there was more to the story. There were other people there who were curious, who were looking at the footprints around her mobile home. And there was one little boy, and he had one of those old Polaroid cameras where you put the cartridge in and the picture comes out. He was taking pictures of that. And the little boy said to the man, I'm taking a picture of the footprint. And he grabs the picture from the kid, wrinkles it up, and says something like, you made a picture for us.
I come home from work, and there's this car sitting there, and it had Ohio government plates on it. And there's a footprint in the sand. He's about to take pictures of the footprint. And the boy lived there, the older boy. He went and got his camera, and he started doing the same, taking a picture, and the government guy said, no pictures. Danny, well, this guy ignored him. Started taking pictures anyway, and he ripped the camera out of his hand. I don't know if he ripped the film out, I don't remember that part. Took the camera. That's when I started yelling, this is America, you can't do that.
Then he goes over in front of the people and with his foot destroys the footprints. And these people start screaming, and they said, we're calling the police. And they said he got in his vehicle and got out there so fast they almost turned the car over. Who he was, we never found out. But then there's another story. So we talked about that famous case, October 25th, 1973, up out in Fayette County with the UFO on the ground, 2 Bigfoot. So it was a part of our regular follow-up for important cases. We'd keep in touch with some of these people who had important cases over the years just to see what had happened in their lives, anything else that had happened. And years later, we went back again, and we had been interviewing him many times since then. But years later, we had considered the possibility of maybe doing some hypnosis with him. Because at the time it happened, there was indication from a famous psychiatrist who got involved in the case not to use hypnosis at that time. So we did not, and that's how it was. But anyhow, years later, we go back and talk to the witness and think of that possibility and suggest to him we're considering maybe doing hypnosis. He looked at my associate and I very oddly, and he said, "Why do you want to hypnotize me again?" And we said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Probably it was about a week or two after it happened." Now, my teams have been up there many times after that period, after that incident happened. He thought somehow that these two fellows that showed up were somehow related to my group. The problem was, one was in an Air Force uniform, the other was in a dark suit. The fellow with the Air Force uniform had a briefcase. Anyhow, they came, he said at the time, they came to him, they wanted him to explain everything that happened that night, what he saw, what the Bigfoot looked like, what the UFO looked like, and then the Air Force guy opens up his briefcase and pulls out photographs of UFOs and Bigfoot and wanted him to point out what looked similar. And he said at that point, they asked if they could hypnotize him, which apparently they did. When they were done, they said they believed he was telling the truth, they believed the story, they would be in touch. That was the last he ever saw them. And of course, we tried to track it down, but you got to remember now, that's 1973. The Air Force Project Blue Book had closed down officially in January 1970. So there was no records to be found, whoever they might be. So whether they were government or somebody else, we'll probably never know.
The presence of unmarked or black helicopters is sometimes mentioned in cases where government operatives are suspected as being present. At the very least, they speak to the presence of a person or persons with resources beyond that of the average person, or even the above-average Sasquatch hunter. Sightings are frequent in areas thick with Sasquatch activity, such as the Chestnut Ridge and the land between the lakes. Another common feature in the wake of UFO encounters, conjecture over black helicopters of ambiguous origin would seem to be on the rise in some circles. The black helicopters themselves do in fact boast their own set of conspiracy theories separate from the UFO, Bigfoot, and even Men in Black categories. Unverified rumors of black helicopters engaging in maneuvers impossible for even the most advanced modern technology, and more bizarre rumblings that they may be extraterrestrial craft in disguise. This additional set of unverifiable anecdotes adds additional layers of confusion to an already confusing scenario, leaving us with only additional questions.
I have never experienced the military up here. I take that back. I've seen a couple of very large Black Hawk helicopters fly over an area where we were doing research during the day. And I know there is a base around here somewhere. I just don't know where it's at. But I think we witnessed 3 or 4 flying in a formation. And they didn't seem to be interested in us. They just seemed to be flying from north to south. Other people have said they've seen caravans of military troop trucks coming up, and then small troops get out and go into the forest. I've never witnessed that, but I've heard it on many occasions. People have seen either small elite groups of people training or doing exercises. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never experienced it.
Over the years, I've heard different people talking about black helicopters being involved with UFO incidents. I can tell you this, 1972, I mentioned about an incident happening outside of Greensburg. One thing that was going on in Westmoreland County, we were getting reports from various people for weeks of formations of luminous spherical objects in the sky and some type of metallic material falling at times from these objects. So we were getting out to some of these locations and we recovered some of that metallic material. For a better term, we call it space grass. John Keel talked about finding something similar back years before. And there was one incident up on the Backley side of the Chestnut Ridge. So now you're looking outside of Latrobe, to the right of Route 30 when you're heading down towards Latrobe. On that side of the ridge, you have Bagley and Youngstown. People had found this metallic material, this residue in the trees, in the branches, on the ground, and it came down in clumps. So we recovered that material. And over the years, I had various professional labs examine it. And we know what the material was made of. It was almost 100% aluminum, most of it. but nobody could identify what this was or what the purpose was. This was not radar chaff. We knew there was a difference between this and radar chaff. We had samples of actual radar chaff too to compare it to. And these were thousands of strands of this very thin metallic materials all interwoven together. So it didn't disperse like radar chaff, it came down in clumps. And during that time, there were quite a number of reports of military helicopters in those areas, but they weren't black. These are more like Apache type helicopters, as I recall.
I hear stories nonstop about, a mysterious van showing up, a helicopter showing up, people that don't show identification and show up and take bodies away. How would they know that? I have no idea. And I don't know that we'll ever know that. But just from talking to people on the inside, even they said that there wouldn't be any one person they didn't believe that would know. There might be one person, but there wouldn't be more than one that would know exactly what was going on.
I've heard all kind of reports about hidden bunkers, and I've seen military helicopters circling over my head when I've been over there in this Dunbar area, in this Forbes State Forest area. And you get an uncomfortable feeling when something as big as a Apache helicopter is flying over your head in circles and then flies away, and it doesn't look like your ordinary standard military helicopter. It's all black.
Incidents like this prompt many to ask who or what might be interfering with their attempts to gather information. Who has the motivation to do so, never mind the capability? It would seem a short list, and naturally the inclination becomes to point the finger at government-sponsored operatives. What motivations exist to prompt such a seemingly bizarre act, interfering in the activity of a Sasquatch researcher, when certainly government resources are needed elsewhere? Why would they bother if the reality of the Sasquatch question is in fact one of non-reality? Could there be a reason, or even a good reason, to do just that? Much of the difficulty in dissecting the idea of a Bigfoot conspiracy lies in the nature of the conspiracy itself. The idea of a cover-up is one of subjective success. If the cover-up were successful, then theoretically no one would know about it, and the conversation would end before it begins. But because the conspiracy theory exists, the effectiveness of any activity to retain secrecy would seem, by default, ineffective. It becomes a circular debate, wherein arguing for the idea of a conspiracy also becomes one of arguing against it. Then again, human beings are fallible. It would also seem inevitable that in order for such a conspiracy to be in play, many, many people would need to be involved in order to pull it off. Perhaps the rumors of such a cover-up are in itself validation of its existence, but once again, the argument becomes circular. Without a verifiable place to hang the speculative hat, it becomes difficult to chase any further down this avenue without the aid of speculation and guesswork. This speculation does not take place in a vacuum, however. Real-life examples of researchers experiencing mysterious equipment failures or electronic interference emanating from no clear source have cropped up in numerous field investigations. These add an additional layer of intrigue beyond simply seeing men wearing fatigues or driving unmarked vehicles. Actual real-time interference with an individual's personal equipment would seem to hint at a far more devious undertone. The question of why is an important one to ask, and may be the key to the entire question of a cover-up. If the government is concealing reports and information about Sasquatch, then surely there must be a reason for it.
Well, motivations. I have my own theory about what I believe Bigfoot is, and if my theory is anywhere close to being correct, then that would be certainly a motivation for the government to keep the secret. I think that Bigfoot is an original native tribe of Pangea, okay? And I say that, and I've always thought that, and I kind of got confirmed that actually in a very recent episode I did with a member of the Cheyenne Nation. who shared an origin story from the Cheyenne Nation, where they called them the hairy men, and then the red men and the white men all were created together. The thing was that the white man and the red man stuck around to find out what their purpose was from the great creator. The hairy man took off. So the hairy man did not find what his purpose was directly from the creator, and has been in the shadows this whole time, watching the white man and the red man to try to figure out what their purpose is. And so when you hear that, and that's kind of some of the stuff I kind of thought, that they were a real, people. They're people. They're not just animals. They're more people. And I've always thought that maybe, what if this is a tribe, a Native American tribe, that back a couple hundred years ago, when the government was settling, when we were forcefully taking much of North America, that this was a tribe that wasn't going to go anywhere. And we had to kind of make a deal with them that we'll give you your space, and we'll stay out of your space, and you stay out of our space, and we'll just kind of coexist, because we can't really defeat you. So if these are so imagine what that would do to our way of thinking, if to find out that these really, these creatures really are just a branch of the human tree, so to speak. And that would open up a whole nother can of worms. So it would be real easy just to keep them on the back burner and say they don't really exist. We don't really have to acknowledge them, and pretend you didn't see that 9-foot creature that's standing in front of you.
So I think that there's a cover-up in as much as they are not coming out and saying that this is definitively a flesh and blood creature that's part of our natural environment, part of our ecosystem. But I'm not sure. I guess the only agenda that they would have is not allowing people to know that there's something's out there, because they don't want people afraid about going into the woods, or they don't want people out there hunting them. Yeah, because you have to think about this too. So, we talk about, Bigfoot, but there's also a practicality to this as well too. Remember whenever the spotted owl was discovered in parts of the redwood forest, and logging had to stop. And that's the other thing too. So if the government says that Bigfoot is out there undeniably as an animal, then there has to be things in place to keep its environment protected as well too. And if it's proven that these things can migrate, and what kind of swath of territory that they happen to cover, then there might be great tracts of land that have to be preserved. And I think that might be part of a kind of dubious economic cover-up as well.
Environmental and conservation concerns may be one. The best way to protect an endangered species may be to prevent people from finding out about it in the first place, though this is entirely contradictory to how actual and historical conservation efforts work in real life. Raising awareness and gaining public support is a key element in the success of these programs, as well as a critical step in obtaining funding for research. If we assume that governmental bodies are conducting research of the Sasquatch behind closed doors, then needing public support and funding may be a misnomer. But once again, this would present an apparent anomaly in the world of conservation, and further begs the question of why? Public safety is likely to be another. How many would set off in the wilderness with the intent of hunting the wood ape for themselves, if it were ever recognized as an actuality, and what accidents or injuries may result from it? Even worse, how many human beings might accidentally be caught in the crossfire, either through misidentification or simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time? There are rules and etiquette which dictate the conduct of law-abiding hunters, but the hysteria which could result from the revelation that Bigfoot is real might be difficult to guess at. Furthermore, the formation of an armed posse was not uncommon in the early days of Bigfoot fever, when incensed locals would gather into search parties and take to the woods in the wake of a high-profile Sasquatch encounter. Today, information travels faster, and in a world driven by the thing referred to as clickbait, we can only guess what sort of tumultuous and immediate response would result, or how quickly the situation could get out of hand. Perhaps also there is a concern for the general public response. Outrage over the revealing of a long-concealed secret, panic in areas where Sasquatch is believed to be present, mass disruption in academic circles. Such a revelation might prompt some to question the very nature of the human experience, and have implications across the spectrum for science and religion. There are many organized institutions who could be assumed to have a vested interest in preventing any or all of these events, particularly on a large scale, but once again, we can only speculate as to whether this is true. A simple question to answer, and a good place to start, might be whether the government or military has ever taken an interest in Sasquatch at all. It might be easy to assume that there is nothing on record and no sort of relationship between the two. The most skeptical might be quick to dismiss the possibility outright, but history does point us to at least a few examples, even loose ones, of a relationship between the military, intelligence community, and the Sasquatch entity, even if only in the abstract.
One of the reasons I think that people are really interested in the idea of government information in the first place is because it is a kind of qualified information source. In other words, you have an official source, records that are kept by official bodies, and again, to be able to recover those about any of these anomalous topics would help to lend some weight to the sighting reports and other volume of data that's been collected. When you pair the governmental records that can be obtained, if any exist, with quality historical resources, primary sources, secondary sources that provide context for that. In the case of Sasquatch, indigenous American legends and traditions. All of this together helps to assemble a broader picture that not only says, hey, there are official sources of information that may corroborate eyewitness reports and the general kind of cultural mythos surrounding ideas like Sasquatch, and also for those who say, well, this is a modern phenomenon. It all began in the 1920s. It really kind of gains traction in the 50s, and today it's just a modern cultural phenomenon, but it's all folklore and mythology. Well, for those who would say it's a modern phenomenon, if we look back in history and we can complement the modern reports with historical data, again, that combination of historical record and also official data really helps to bolster the claims that, hey, people are really experiencing a physical, tangible phenomenon.
The word conspiracy is gets banded about way too much, in my estimation. I guess technically conspiracy is just one or more people getting together to do something or hide something or prevent something from being found out. Whatever. I don't think, I got to be honest with you, I don't think the government as a whole is that, adept at doing anything that they could keep, this kind of thing a secret. Because like I said, I think maybe there's one or two people that really have all the knowledge of what may be going on. I think as a whole, I think to think that the government could pull something like this off and have it not get out is kind of crazy in itself. Just because I don't think I just don't think the government could pull it off.
As armchair investigators and far-flung enthusiasts continue to chase after this question, countless Freedom of Information Act requests and old-fashioned digging continue to yield none but the vaguest results. But the FBI is not the only group within the United States that deals in classified documents. What of the other branches of the United States intelligence framework? Might one of them be concealing additional secrets? More mundanely, might there be some long-forgotten document, shoddily copied on an ancient Xerox machine or hastily drafted on an antique typewriter, detailing reports of an upright, ape-like creature lurking in the wilderness? Unfortunately, these real-world examples of the government and Sasquatch intersecting do not point conclusively toward a Sasquatch conspiracy or any kind of act of cover-up. One is a fascinating story concerning a legend in the Sasquatch field, and the other is a clever branding choice on the part of the U.S. military. Both interesting, but unfortunate, dead ends for the conspiratorially minded. Peeking behind the curtain of a theoretical Sasquatch conspiracy, or determining if such a thing even exists, may require more dramatic events than those currently on record. Until the day one or more whistleblowers come forward, a stack of classified documents is brought to light, or some other dramatic event that would provide proof of a cover-up takes place, we are left only to speculate after the potential of a Sasquatch conspiracy. We can continue to examine reports of men in black, unmarked helicopters, and mysterious electronic interference, but without more to go on, we are left with only theories. And theories will likely continue to abound as the search for Sasquatch will certainly continue. What role, if any, the government will play in that search remains to be seen. For now, hundreds of private individuals continue the ongoing hunt, clinging to the possibility that even a hypothetical government conspiracy will not be sufficient to prevent truth from seeing the light of day.